Welcome inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, where Ohio State is preparing for its sixth game of the 2023 season against Purdue, coming off of a 37-17 win over Maryland this past weekend. Maybe it didn't go quite as easily as we thought it would for Ohio State, but the Buckeyes ultimately coming away with a cover. However, I think a lot of the talk here inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center at Ryan Day's press conference today, centering on the struggles in the run game as Ohio State averaged less than 2 yards per carry against Maryland.
Yeah, I mean, some of that has to do with Travion being out, but really you still can't, I mean, that's just not an acceptable number to be under 2 yards per carry in a game like that. And, you know, again, it comes down to execution is what Ryan Day has been saying all year, all offseason, and he said it again today. From his perspective, the main issue is execution. Now, there's things they need to do better up front. That's clear. Things with hand placement, with technique. There's a lot of different little things, and maybe the backs aren't always hitting the right holes too. It's a collective effort, but execution is what Day said is going to get them to where they need to go in the run game.
Yeah, I think Travion Henderson was missed. I think he has that extra gear of explosiveness and shiftiness that Chip Trayanum and Mayan Williams might not have, but I think it starts with the offensive line. And I think the reality is 5 games into the season, the offensive line just hasn't been up to that standard where you want it to be at Ohio State. And I thought one exchange that was particularly interesting during today's press conference was Ryan Day was asked if he thinks there's a gap between those starting 5 offensive linemen and the backups, because we really haven't seen the backups play at all this year. And Day said he thinks there is, but there hasn't been anybody behind those starting 5 who is pushed to take, 25, 30 snaps away from those guys. And so, that's certainly a concern in the fact that we haven't seen this starting 5 get to a point where they're dominating up front yet. Even though they've looked at changes, they don't feel like there's any from a personnel standpoint they can make right now that would actually make them better, which means, going back to what you said, the execution just has to be better.
Right, and it's kind of riding or dying with this group now. You have to get there with the front 5 you have, because it's clear, as Day stated, that there's a talent discrepancy between them, even if they haven't met the standard so far. And so, you've got to get them there by the execution, through the coaching. It's going to be a challenge to get this offensive line to where it needs to be. I mean, by 2 weeks from now, then they play Penn State. Penn State's coming to town.
Yeah, and of course you can't look past Purdue, because we know the history of Ohio State playing in West Lafayette. Only 3-5 since 2000. When Day was asked about that, he kind of had a reaction to that, like, whoa, I think he was a little bit caught off guard by how bad Ohio State's record has been in West Lafayette over the past 23 years. So certainly a game you can't overlook this week. The good news regarding Travion Henderson, he is expected back this week. Emeka Egbuka, sounds like that's more up in the air, but the good news there is Ryan Day said it's not expected to be a long-term injury. So certainly I think the hope would be that you would have Emeka Egbuka back for that Penn State game. I would anticipate maybe we see Xavier Johnson start in his place this week at Purdue.
Yeah, I think really you want to preserve Egbuka for Penn State for down the road, even if you still want to win this game, obviously, but he was in a walking boot after that game. I think that whatever that injury is, it's something that, while it isn't long term, as Day said, it's something you want to get him back from and ensure he's got the proper rest to be full go down this stretch, because it really is a brutal October and November for Ohio State. Now, in terms of someone who is healthy but also isn't playing, we found out today that Ohio State is trying to preserve Dallan Hayden's red shirt for this year. They said since they have 3 running backs that they feel good about, between Travion Henderson, Chip Trayanum, and Mayan Williams there, that they want to keep Dallan ready to go for next year, but he could still see some action down the stretch because of the 4-game rule with the red shirt. But Ohio State is trying to keep that eligibility for him.
Yeah, you never know what happens. If multiple guys get hurt and they can't play, then they might need Dallan Hayden to play, and in that case he will. But I think they are smart to preserve that red shirt. I'm sure that's something that they've talked about with him and made sure that's something that he's on board with, because he did use up a year of eligibility last year when probably he didn't expect to. He was probably supposed to redshirt initially last year. By not playing over 4 games this year, he can still have 3 years of eligibility. And I think if the only snaps he's going to get are just occasional snaps at the end of games, then that's the smart way to play it. Now, if you need him, that changes the equation. And I do think there could have been a legitimate case for whether it was Dallin Hayden or Evan Pryor, maybe mixing one of those guys in with Travion Henderson out last week to try to get a different spark in there. But I do think as long as Travion, Chip, and Mayan are healthy, those 3, particularly Travion and Chip, are going to get most of the carries there at running back. And so I think that's a smart move with Dallin Hayden. I think when people think of red shirts, they so often just think of a freshman. But there are a few guys, and Lorenzo Styles Jr. is another guy that they're clearly making an effort to preserve his red shirt, because he'd be starting on special teams every game if they weren't. He's only played in 2 games so far. And so I think they are making some conscious roster management decisions for guys like Dallin Hayden and Lorenzo Styles Jr., who aren't going to play big roles on offense or defense this year, but they could next year, depending on who goes to the NFL.
Absolutely, Dan. And I think keeping that eligibility for the future is an important thing to think about while you're still trying to win games. And this year, and certainly a big one to win on the road. We know what can go wrong against Lafayette.
Yep, Ohio State at Purdue, noon game on Peacock. So hopefully you've figured out how you're going to watch the game on Saturday. If you aren't able to watch it, then come to 11warriors.com, as we will have full coverage before, during, and after Buckeyes versus Boilermakers.